Hello chess fans, today I wanted to share some of the most notable games I've played throughout my life that helped shape what I play in terms of openings today. So I'm going to start with my first ever over-the-board game that I played when I was just around 6 years old, I think. And the only thing I knew at the time was Scholar's Mate and to always play e4 and 5. And I really didn't know anything. I barely knew how the pieces move. And so my first game was at a provincial tournament. I started off with e4, and I was a grade 1 at the time. This was the first time I've ever played chess. My opponent went e5. I went for queen h5. Now, queen h5 is a horrible move. We all know you should develop the pieces in the opening. But at the time, I didn't really know better than to go for Scholar's Mate. And my opponent pretty much proved that they didn't know better either, as here they played the move a6. And here I was ecstatic because I was just like, oh, I'm going to get bishop c4 and it's game over. Now, obviously here there's a free pawn, but, you can't really see those things when you're probably around a 200 rated chess player. So I went for bishop c4, and here my opponent went b5, attacking my bishop. And here I was so happy to win my first ever chess game after queen takes f7. And this started basically a passion for chess that I continue to this day. Now, this was the first ever opening I had. And now let's go into the second game. I was white again. And this game was around 2 or 3 years later. I'd become a seasoned player. I wasn't the worst player in the world. I was around 1,000 over the board at this point, which can be equivalent to maybe 1200chess.com or so. And I'd been playing for a few years now. I hadn't been practicing much. But what I did know is I did know really a lot of positions in the Italian game. So now I knew the fried liver, and I knew sort of this knight d5 and castle setup, and pretty much just how to develop my pieces. So here, at the kids level, most players play bishop c5, and that's simply to avoid the fried liver attack because it's so dangerous at the beginner level. But here my opponent played it, basically daring me to go in and try to beat him in the fried liver defense. And I obliged. I'm saying, okay, I'm not afraid of you. I'm going to go and try and beat you. So my opponent played d5, and after it takes, my opponent blundered the game away with knight takes d5. And this was the most common move at the scholastic level for so long. And many players do not know how to meet the fried liver. Obviously, the best move here is undoubtedly knight a5. Or you can play knight d4, which is a move that I also recommended. My opponent played knight takes d5, which loses immediately, to knight takes f7, a very simple move, and one that pretty much a lot of beginners know. So here my opponent took with the king. I went for queen f3, attacking the knight and the king at the same time, bishop, king e6, and knight c3, attacking the knight, and here my opponent went knight b4. And I've had this position a ton of times, and this is what kind of developed my attacking sense, to constantly play these positions where you're down a piece. It looks scary, but white is completely winning all this time. And here I castled. And as with any sort of attacking position, it's really hard for the defender to defend their position because it's just unpleasant. It's so much easier to attack, to have all your pieces near their king, rather than to be very scared of getting checkmated or losing lots of material at any moment. And here my opponent cracked under the pressure. My opponent was around a 1200, and my opponent played queen f6. And here it's very simple. It's just a free piece. After takes, takes, and takes. Just an absolutely free piece. But here, again, I wasn't the strongest chess player in the world, and I thought, oh, if I go here, they're going to have to take with their king, and then I still have a free piece. But I completely missed that they can take with this. And this was a tiebreaker game, and here, throughout the tournament, I didn't do that well. I was tying for third, and I ended up losing this game. I resigned this game at this point because I really was unhappy with how I just made a huge blunder. And obviously, you should continue playing from here. There are always chances to win. For example, the move a3 is still not even losing, obviously losing for white after takes something like king e7 and rook b1. The position is closer to equal than to black being better. So it was unclear why I resigned here, but generally you need to have a good mindset when going to a chess game. If you're mad, if you're angry, I highly recommend you take a 10-minute break, watch a YouTube video or something, and get back to it. And so this was my second pretty much game that really influenced how I play today. Now the third game was a few years after this. I was around 1200 at this time, and I was the strongest player in this tournament, which is a scholastic section tournament. Or not the strongest player, one of the strongest players. So my opponent went for e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. I went for this, and here a lot of scholastic players are very tricky. So my opponent played knight d4. Now, if you haven't seen this move before, it's a great thing that I'm showing you this move now because it's a very tricky move that a lot of people are going to fall for. So the first time I saw this, I just thought my opponent was being, like, most of my opponents are not the strongest players in the world, so I thought my opponent was just playing a bad move. So I just took on e5, which is actually a big mistake, because after queen g5, this is a very tactical line that's just winning for black, and you'll see why. I thought, oh, my opponent just forgot how to play chess. I can just take here, and I have this nice fork. Oh, white is just completely winning. Now, this is a horrible assessment, because after queen takes g2, attacking my rook f1, queen takes e4, I saw, oh, wow, I just lost my queen. If I go here, he gets to take my queen. And then I was like, oh, wait, but I can block without my bishop. And here, after knight f3, it ended the quickest game in the round, and I was really demoralized after this. I was just like, wow, how did this happen? But these are the type of tricks that you have to remember and not let happen to you. After knight d4, black is just completely losing after knight takes, and here. There's just really no chance for black to get any sort of advantage in this sort of position. Alright, let's move on to the fourth game. Oh, alright. Well, I did show you the position. I was just going to show you what usually happens at the scholastic level. These are the sort of positions that I was getting every single time. I was hardening my sort of abilities in these sorts of positions. But while this was fine at the scholastic and the level within my provincial level, it was not really okay at the national level. Every year I went to the nationals and I got battered. I got destroyed by the fact that I didn't have any opening knowledge outside of this. But what does this tell you? You don't really need opening knowledge as long as you focus on the opening principles, which is something that maybe I did not have the strongest of. If you constantly only play these positions, you pretty much only know to develop your piece towards the center like this. So when you have to develop your piece towards the center like this, or put the bishop here, or put the bishop here, or put this bishop here, maybe play a little bit more passive. That was very hard for a player at the time. So now let's go into the fifth game. Now this game was my first ever adult tournament game, and I was around 1250 at the time, and the adult ratings are a lot higher than the scholastic ratings, understandably so, because of the fact that, adults are generally going to be stronger. So my opponent started off with d4, and I'm just going to flip this to black in a second. And so I was really shocked at d4. I have actually never seen d4 in my life up to this point, which may be shocking. I was already 1250, probably like 1800 lead chess, maybe 1500 chess.com, and I'd never seen d4 up to this point. But it's because I generally had a pretty okay understanding of the game. So I went for d5, which is the only move I knew how to play. c4, I went for c6 because an imbalance like this looked to just not make sense because I didn't want to block my bishop. So I played c6. Knight c3, I went for bishop f5 because I wanted to play e6, but I couldn't play e6 because the bishop would then get locked in. So I was like, oh, I have to get the bishop out of the pawn chain, and this is already a horrible move. We know you can't be doing this. My opponent went for queen b3. I went for knight f6. Queen takes b7, knight b7, queen takes c8, rook c8, queen a4. And I'm just going to stop from here because I went on to lose this game, and I don't have the notation for it. This is just off memory. But it basically shows you that, yeah, you can get a really quickly a losing position if you don't know the absolute basics of an opening. At this point, I had never ever seen d4 before in my life. And so I was shocked when it came on the board. And it was a very tragic thing that in the scholastic level, these sort of levels, that you never ever see this d4 move. Nowadays, you might see the London a lot, which goes into my next game. This was my second game at that tournament, and I saw d4 again. And this time, somebody had told me what to do. I was prepared to play against the c4 variation. After d5, my opponent shocked me with bishop f4. Again, nowadays, this might seem like, oh, everybody plays the London. But keep in mind, this was around 4 or 5 years ago. Like, chess on the internet was much smaller. The London was not that popular. Well, it was still pretty popular, but it was not as known as it is now. And so I played knight f6. This is what my coach told me to do. They told me, not my coach, one of the organization leads told me to do. They told me to play knight f6, go for c6, and then you can get the bishop out. Now my opponent went for bishop e3, and I listened to the president. I played bishop f5, developing my bishop outside the pawn chain. My opponent went for knight f3, and I went for e6, developing the bishop outside the pawn chain. Now I was very happy. I was like, okay, we have a symmetrical position. I knew that maybe the knight doesn't want to go here because that's something that I just knew. My coach also told me that, or somebody else did. So my opponent played c4, and I knew the knight's not going to go here because it's just bad here. So I played knight b7, which is a very strange move. I don't really know why I didn't play a move like c6. Seems a lot more natural to me. Or even the natural rook takes and then bishop b4 and the king has to move. Those are both reasonable moves here. Well, I played knight b7 and my opponent played queen b3. And here I was like, oh no, I did the same mistake again. And now simple enough here is after takes to go knight b6. And that's fine. But after takes, that's what I thought was going to happen. Well, my opponent took on b7, which is a huge blunder because I have this move knight d5. Attacking the bishop, threatening to double their pawns, but also defending this and threatening rook b8. Here my opponent played bishop g3, another horrible move. And after rook b8, queen takes a7, rook takes b2, really they have no way to sort of save their position. For example, if knight c2, this pawn is just running up the board. And my opponent, I guess, saw that. I think my opponent was stronger than me in this game, and they took on c4. And after bishop takes b1, the game only lasted like 15 more moves, and I managed to win the game. And here you might say, wait, why did you win the game? It's because black is just simply up a full piece. So this game, I actually won against 1600. It was a huge win for me, for my basically confidence. I was like, wow, I beat a player rated over 400 points higher than me, and it wasn't even that difficult. I just followed some basic opening principles, and I was able to get good positions. So now let's go into my next game. And this was the first time I ever in my life deviated versus e4. Now this game is actually on my channel, and it was the first time. It was a tournament from 3 or 4 years ago, and it was the first time I didn't play e5. I decided to play c6, which was my first ever opening. You can find a link in the cards to my hyper aggressive repertoire. So my opponent played d4, d5, e5, bishop f5. This is what I kind of recommend to play. I kind of recommend to play c5, but at the time I only knew bishop f5, knight f3, and here we just develop it like normal. Knight d7 to prepare c5, castle, and knight e7. And the point of knight e7 is that after c5 we want to get knight c6, or we want to move the bishop back and get knight f5. Now, did I know any of this? No. All I knew was that the knights go here and here in the Caro-Kann, and the bishop goes outside. And this was the point of the theory where I was lost. So my opponent went knight b2, and I had no idea what to do. And I made a really bad move. c5 is a very, very bad move. And it's good that you guys see this move now, because after c4, white is just completely winning, to be honest. The engine says it's only plus 0.5, but the position is horrible. Absolutely terrible for black. Black is just way too underdeveloped with the king in the center, and with the center exploding like this, there's going to be serious consequences. So I played the most popular move, which is considered to be a blunder. C takes d4. And I'm in good company here because a lot of GMs have played this and lost a lot of games. As here, white has a 65% win rate, black has a 7% win rate, which is very bad. So my opponent went knight takes d4. And here, if you're ever losing by a lot, and you can tell it, here I can smell that I'm absolutely being destroyed, just grab a pawn for your measure. Maybe worst case scenario, you give the pawn back and you survive. Or sorry, the best case scenario, you give the pawn back and you survive. Worst case scenario, you just get run off the board. And it's better you make your opponent prove that they can run off the board than have to just suffer the whole game without any chance of victory. So t takes, I took with the queen, attacking the knight. My opponent took the knight, takes, and my opponent went for queen a4 check. And after knight c6, the position is actually equal. Now you might say, what did my opponent do wrong here? After takes here, they should first go queen a4. And it's because this knight is helping in the attack, while this bishop is really not doing anything. It's not helping the defense. It's doing nothing. And after bishop f3, again, white is going to be having some fun here. But instead takes here. And after queen d7, the position is slightly better for black. My opponent went knight b3. They intended to play knight a5. Instead, they probably should have played knight c4, which also threatens to play knight e5. So knight b3, bishop d6. I just want to develop. Rook d1. Queen c7, getting out of the way. Knight a5. Castles. I was attacking here, so I wasn't too afraid of losing this. And my opponent played knight b7, which, okay, they should have probably taken here. And after takes here, take here. Black is up a pawn, but white has the bishop pair, and white has this sort of weakness on the half-open file. The position is roughly equal. Said knight takes b7. I took here. King h1. I'm just going to quickly go over the rest of these moves. They're not too important to this game. Just here, find a nice tactic. The move is knight takes f2 here, and this fork. Now I missed that. I play h5, and then here my opponent resigned. So now it's not too important about the game exactly, but more important is the fact that I managed to get this sort of very interesting opening out of the Caro-Kann, which is what I highly recommend. Most players, the first opening you ever learn is e5. I highly recommend, if you are in the on chess.com, maybe 1200 and up, or if you are on Lichess, 1600 and up. I highly recommend the first ever opening you learn is a Caro-Kann. Super simple, just to get the pawn in the center and then get the bishop outside the pawn chain. Unlike the French defense, where you're going to have to get your bishop locked in. The Caro-Kann tries to play a little bit more beginner friendly, which, okay, we're not getting the bishop locked in, and we're going to have this familiar stuff to attack the center. Now I'm going to go over the final game, which sort of basically helped my chess career. It was my switch to the Nimzo Indian. So after d4, finally I was around 1600 over the board. I learned that, okay, it's the Slav, the Queen's Gambit decline. These are not things I want to play. I want to go for my opponent's throat, try to kill them, try to run them off the board, and I'm going to go for the Nimzo Indian. So here my opponent went for c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4. And at this point I was against the 1800, and I was doing really well in this tournament. I had 3 out of 3. This was the 4th game, and I was really hoping to get a really nice result here to shoot up my rating, because at this time I felt like I was a little bit underrated. This was around 3 years ago. So my opponent went e3, and here I went castles, which is the main move, but I think a little bit of a mistake, because what I was intending to do was play the b6 setup. But after castles, my opponent played b3, b6, and here my opponent could have basically got the best of both worlds by playing knight e2. And the reason why I would have to play b6 first is here they can either go for bishop d2, and after bishop b7 they can't go knight e2 because they have to go knight f3, or they can go for knight e2 right away, in which case they don't have bishop d3. And now by castling first and doing this second, I've basically allowed white to get this ideal setup with knight e2, and then go f3, e4, and white is considered to be pretty much winning. Now instead of that, my opponent went for knight f3, which is a main line, and I went for bishop e7, and my opponent went for a3. Now a3 is not a good move, but after bishop takes, b takes, we see another point of the Nimzo setup. I'll link my Nimzo video up in the cards, but that's pretty much all I knew up to this point. Now the basic framework of the setup is we're going to go knight e4, f5, d6, knight d7, knight f6, the queen comes to h5, the knight can come to g4, the rook can lift up like this, the queen can even come to g6 along with the bishop along the diagonal. It is so fun, and already here black is significantly better, and it's exactly with the setup. So I continue with the setup, and this is where the game I kind of lost the notation for the game. After this point, the notation became like muddled up, but just know in this position black is slightly better, and it is so natural for black. Here in the Lichess database, at least, black has around a 70% win rate and is doing massive, scoring massive here in the database. So this is an opening I highly recommend switching to once you hit around maybe 1500 chess.com or so, maybe 1400 chess.com. It is a very fluid attacking setup, easy to understand, hard to like blunder a lot in, and you just move your pieces towards the opponent's king and hope for good things. So that's the end of today's video, guys. If you like this video, please remember to leave a like and subscribe, and recommend me what to do next, because this is just a look through basically what influenced my openings and what I play today. Now I play pretty much everything, but if you want to see any more videos, please remember to let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next one.